Data drives the information economy, and analytics increasingly powers the steering wheel. Knowing where to go is half the battle in the new world of business. How can you take advantage? Check out this episode of Future Proof to find out.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Your host here, Eric Kavanagh. Very excited to talk about analytics today. Analytics everywhere, the new normal. We're going to talk to four experts online today. We've got Ben Edmond from Connected to Fiber, Dr. Viral Shah from Julia Computing, Alan Jacobson from Alteryx, and Gaurav Deshpande from TigerGraph. And we'll talk all about how analytics is literally everywhere these days. You almost can't go online without touching the result of some analytical engine somewhere. You may not see it in action, but you can see its results. So when you do a search, when you go on a website, when you get something recommended to you, for example, those are all driven by analytics these days, by customer profiles, by companies that are paying attention to where you go online, what you click on, what you do. It's all being gathered up and then crunched and analyzed, and changes happen in your workflow and what you see and what you do. So that's the topic for today. And we have, like I said, four experts. These companies are coming from different angles too, which is always fun. So we've got a couple analytics providers. We have Julia Computing, of course, that's named after a language. Julia, in fact, a lot of people don't know this, but Jupyter Notebooks, the JUP, or the JU rather, is from Jupyter, and it's from Julia. And then the PY is Python and R is R. So Julia, Python, and R, that's where Jupyter comes from. So Jupyter Notebook, that's where the name came from. So with that, let's just jump right in and bring in Alan Jacobson from Alteryx. I've known about Alteryx since before it was called Alteryx, when it was called SRC, I think.
Yep, early days.
Dean Stoker, that's right. We had him on DM Radio in, I think, 2009. So you folks have come a long, long way, and you're now a real visionary in the field. Tell us a bit about what you're doing and how you're able to help companies use analytics for business value.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see the transformation companies are going through. Alteryx is in about 40% of the Global 2000 now. So, one of those companies that you might not have heard the name, but certainly in the analytics world, a very significant player. And we see this incredible journey going on where people, I think if you rewound the clock 15 years ago, everybody was talking about data, and data was the new oil, and how much data do you have? And very quickly, I think, the titles then were chief data officers. It became chief analytic officers, and people started to talk about what type of analysis are you doing with that data? Is it deep learning? Is it neural nets? What are you doing? And then the conversation went from, how big's your data, to from what are you doing with the data, to now how much bottom line impact or top line revenue growth are you creating with these new capabilities? And that's what I love to see, the time to value. Alteryx users typically are getting great ROIs in the first couple of weeks of using the technology. And I think that's really what's changed dramatically. 10, 15 years ago, you might try to put in some enterprise technology and take weeks and months to get it stood up. And then you have to train people and get them running. So to be able to hand people, a free download, have them learn it over lunch, and then call you up or send you an email the next week and tell you about the incredible impact that they've had on their business is just really exciting to see.
Yeah, it's really a heyday, I think, for our industry too. And like 20 years ago or so, when I first got into this business, really only the Fortune 2000 or almost as big as that could afford a data warehouse and do some analysis. Now it's everywhere. I mean, the smallest of businesses can download, as you suggest, a piece of software and start throwing data at it and finding patterns and changing their business. Right? Anyone can do it.
Yeah, and we really see, because of that, the kinds of ways it gets used are just incredible. I mean, when a hurricane hits, we've seen some of our customers, they grab a couple laptops, a battery generator, they show up to a Caribbean island that's been devastated. They create models on the fly to predict the damage by structure, and they're helping get people on the road to recovery faster than ever before because they're leveraging analytics from on a PC with satellite data. And again, in the back of a car on a battery generator, making massive impact.
That's amazing. And you reminded me of another show we did a couple years ago on drones, on drone
Mhm.
technology. And if you combine drones with analytics, for example, all of a sudden you can conquer what used to take months in just days of assessing the damage from a storm, for example. Someone told me, in fact, at a conference that it went from like $2,000 per house, the actual cost of just assessing the damage, down to like 200 bucks.
Yeah, no,
Right.
and really the prevalence of this stuff, whether it's a finance analyst trying to do the reconciliation at the end of the month, fraud analysis, marketing optimization. Before this call got started, it was interesting to hear some of the use cases other people were bringing up. It's everywhere now. Now we're in the middle of a global pandemic, and the number of use cases, that Alteryx is involved with, whether it's the largest medical supply companies, distributors in the world, optimizing their supply chain using Alteryx, or government agencies leveraging Alteryx to really understand, the impact that COVID is
Hmm.
having on them. Um, Small business associations trying to figure out how to get funding into the hands of businesses and individuals. All these use cases are just amazing analytic use cases where, again, if you rewound the clock 10, 15 years ago, it was hard to figure out how to implement these sorts of things quickly and efficiently. But now, again, it's a free download sort of a situation, and you're off to the races.
Yeah, and it's always going to require people too. I think one of the sort of false narratives out there is that AI is going to come along and it's going to take all these jobs, and that's just not true at all. But I did hear a real funny comment one time. A guy said, "Well, AI, people who use AI will replace the people who don't use AI." Like that will happen, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's better job opportunities for people with these analytic skills. I mean, if you are the digital accountant versus the old school accountant, you
Right.
probably are going to command more money on the marketplace and have more opportunities available to you. And so I see this happening in almost every profession out there: the digital marketing professional, the digital, fill in the blank, logistics analyst, finance professional. It's certainly a skill that not only businesses need because of the analytic divide affecting businesses, winners and losers,
Right.
it's affecting people in the workforce.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And talk about a forcing function. COVID comes along, and one of the stories I keep hearing is that so many of the predictive models that were built using analytics went out the window because human behavior changed dramatically. So you do have to stay on top of these models. Once you build them, they work until they don't, and you want to be constantly monitoring that to notice when they drop off, and then you got to change something, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are two methods here, and it's really interesting. The old school way of doing this is you built a model, it was relatively static. You would check it maybe once a quarter or once a year, and then if
Right.
it needed updating, you would update it. And that was the whole vernacular of model management and monitoring. That's the way many people have operated and still do today. There are many models now where people are building a pipeline that is automatically retuning the model basically real time as new data is coming in. So instead of just building a model once and then monitoring it a quarter later, the models are constantly adapting and adjusting. And certainly companies that were using that more modern method were able to more rapidly react when COVID hit. So if you were
Right.
looking at your inventory and your supply chain ETAs and automatically adjusting with dynamic models, you probably fared much better, at least through the early days of COVID hitting, than companies that were doing it maybe an older way.
Right. No, that's exactly right. So, folks, the more you're tuned in to analytics, the more you're leveraging it, it's going to change your corporate culture in very positive ways. You're just going to be grounded more. And I guess I'll use that as a segue to bring in Gaurav Deshpande. But, Alan, stick around for the roundtable. Gaurav, you folks really focused on graph technology, which is fantastic for identifying relationships. Right. So, a traditional database, rows and columns, it's there to store lots of stuff and for transactional purposes, for example. Then you have column store databases that are good for analytics because they compress very well. It's pretty clean. But what's cool about Graph is that it focuses on nodes and edges, and it's very useful for finding relationships between things like people, objects, customers, products, whatever the case may be. And that's really taking off as well, right, Graph? Tell us about that.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting me to the party, Eric. As always,
Yeah.
happy to be part of the team here. Yeah, we are really seeing a huge growth in graph technology, and that's been driven off of three fundamental needs that enterprises and organizations of all sizes have. Those three needs are the ability to connect all your data sets and pipelines. The second need is the ability to analyze that data much, much faster than what you need to, especially in the face of things like COVID-19 or a hurricane or a tsunami, or in otherwise, if you just want to back to Alan's point, if you want to succeed and thrive in the digital economy, analytics has to be a core competency. So the ability to do analyze that data once you connect it is the second part. And the third part is, just like human beings do, learn from that data. So that connect, analyze, and learn from the data is what we are focused on at Tigergraph and graph technology as a whole. As we get more data digitized and organized digitally, available digitally, connect, analyze, and learn from the data becomes a lot faster. I'll give you an example. Jaguar Land Rover, the luxury automobile manufacturer, one of my favorite cars from childhood and even now. Uh, they were hit like everybody else was with the COVID-19 pandemic. Supply disruptions, 60% of what they know about supply chain was no longer valid, to your point, Eric. And suddenly with that shift, they had Tigergraph to do their supply chain planning. Previously it used to take them 3 weeks to do the supply chain replanning. Now they do it in 45 minutes. So that
Wow.
connect, analyze, and learn from the data lot faster has a material implication to your competitive differentiation, your market share, and frankly, your ability to survive and thrive in the current market.
Yeah, well, people need to be able to pivot very quickly these days. And by going that route, and this is the kind of the fun thing, right? It may not sound like the sexiest thing, we're saving time, but time is money, man. Time is money. And you know what else it is? Morale. So that's a big talking point for me is that if you use these technologies well, your employee morale is going to go way up because they're not going to be hacking through the forest with a dull knife. They're going to be just kind of cruising through on one of those spaceships from Star Wars, just cruising around looking at stuff. And that's fun, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Move people from data janitors to be
Right.
data scientists. That's a little quote from one of my customers. Okay, so Jaguar Land Rover's data science team was delighted, and so was United Health Group's data science team, because what they could do is they had over 10,000 data scientists that are using Tigergraph there. It's a different use case, customer 360. So they have 50 million customers. How do you build customer 360 for those across 200 different data sets and put it in front of 23,000 call center agents that are picking up the phone and calling?
Wow.
Every time somebody calls the customer service, hello, this is United Health Group. How may I help you? Right?
Right.
Those people, remember, you have heard those refrains from people when you call an insurance company. Oh, my computer is acting up today. It's too slow.
The
It's not the
system is slow
computer.
today.
It's the database and the analytic solution that's driving that view of the information and analysis of that view. That's the part that we are changing. So the morale for the team that picks up the phone and talks to a customer, one of those 23,000 call center agents, is much better, because now they can be assured that the information they're looking at is current, and the analysis that they're doing on top of it is actually accurate and consistent. So that, to your point, that employee morale, both for the call center agents and also from the 10,000 or so data scientists that use the system, is much better, because they know that their analysis is more accurate based on current data.
Yeah, and one of the really cool use cases I've come across for Graph, and this is actually several years ago, was in being able to connect different information systems because it's a graph and so it has relationships. So instead of trying to take your old school CRM solution and pump it directly into your call center solution, you can have a graph in between those environments for identifying the patterns, for identifying the interesting things in there, and then use that as the conduit into your system, right? So it's a very cool enabling technology, right?
It is, yeah. They call it their enterprise brain. So the vice president of advanced technology collaboratives of United Health Group actually presented at Graph Plus AI event back in 2020, in September of 2020. We have the new one coming up on April, so everybody's invited.
All
We'll be
right.
announcing it on Wednesday, but I'm doing an early announcement here. It's Graph Plus AI Summit 2021. So when they present it, they call it their enterprise brain. To your point, Eric, that the ability to bring in these 200 data sets, to bring in these Spark-based pipelines, the Kafka pipelines, and the batch data, and the streaming data, meld it all together into a single member journey user interface that's available for anybody in the organization to use. Right kind of fields show up depending on your role-based access privileges. So you can see the current information, not a day later, not a week later, a fraction of a second later as well.
We're getting real. We're getting fast. I don't know about you, but I saw a meme a while ago that said something like, before you marry someone, make sure, put them on a computer with slow internet just to find out what kind of person they really are. Isn't that dark? That cracked me up. We all want fast internet, fast. You don't want to wait for anything, man. Fast download times. Let's go. Let's go. And next up is someone who's helping make that happen. A guy from Connected to Fiber is the name of the company, Ben Edmond. Welcome to Inside Analysis. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you're enabling the analytical enterprise.
Great. Thanks for having me, Eric. I really appreciate the chance to be here. We are enabling analytics really from a perspective around the connectivity industry, who we serve deeply with a system of intelligence and bring that system of intelligence back to a location level. Fundamentally have a core belief that if you bring analytics down to a location level, it becomes much more usable in the business decisions that they're enabling, whether those are decisions around how much capital to deploy in the market to build more fiber, which everyone wants more faster right now. Or, as a service provider, where do you allocate your sales and marketing resources to go after the optimal customers, given it is a very competitive marketplace? Spending your time on the right opportunities, not the wrong opportunities, makes a massive difference. And when it costs $200 a foot to build fiber in some places, you really want to get that part of the equation correct. So, we do a lot of work to make the analytics that we build usable. And what we found is visualizing and integrating at a location level really has been the magic recipe for unlocking value within the service provider community.
Yeah, and this is really interesting. So you're sort of a niche player in between the service providers and the actual infrastructure that moves stuff around, right? Can you talk about that? So first of all, how did you get the idea for the business?
Sure.
And then explain your role in the network and the ecosystem, basically.
Yeah, it's a fairly complex, really big ecosystem. For all those that don't know, there's over 11,000 physical last mile operators out there around the world that own fiber optics, cable, fixed wireless, coax, copper networks all over the place. And the network du jour is fiber. If you can get it, everyone wants it. But at the end of the day, it's a very, very capital intensive industry. And connected to that is over 50,000 service providers that buy and sell from each other to enable the market to actually work, to make that Google page, come to life for a user that's in Boston or San Francisco or Hong Kong. You actually need a connected world. And what we do is shine a transparent light down to a location level of who has network where, bring that intelligence up with perspectives around the demand, the competition, your ability to serve, and ultimately help enable workflow. And it's really, core to us, not just bring things back to a location level, but infuse analytics into workflow. And that's really where we see the most value in pricing processes and costing processes and capital planning processes and prospecting processes. It's not separating analytics and shining a light in a dashboard. It's literally pulling them right into the workflow for the user to take action and have the result that creates more revenue, creates more margin, helps win rates, does the things that ultimately are being measured in a transformation today.
That's fascinating. So what kind of details do you have? You know what kind of material, what kind of product, what kind of routers, all that kind of stuff?
So we focus on the physical infrastructure connected back into the location. So, and a location is not just a commercial building or a residential home. Today, connectivity matters to the traffic signals and the utility poles to enable wireless, because ultimately wireless is only wireless for a short distance. That needs to be brought back onto the physical infrastructure to actually connect into the rest of the network. So we're looking at access mediums. Is there fiber there? Is there coax? Is there copper? Is it served by wireless? What are the physical tenants inside the location? What service providers have access to it? What right of way is enabling it? What are the cost elements and the pricing rules associated with all that to consume it? Where's the towers? Where's the data centers that those different points interact with to make them accessible to the rest of the world? All kinds of variables around the supply and the demand that get brought up into helping people make decisions around where to prospect, how to price, and how to buy connectivity in a market where no one has enough capital to build everywhere themselves.
And finally, last but not least, we've got Viral Shaw dialing in from Julia Computing. And Julia, these folks created a new software language. And one of the things that really struck me about it is that mathematical operators do what they're supposed to in this language. So I remember way back when I was a kid, and if you wanted to write in BASIC, you wanted to add numbers together, you would write x equals x plus 1, and that was a way to add 1 to x. Well, in math, x doesn't equal x plus 1. X plus 1 equals x plus 1, right? So way back in the day, we baked into the programming languages some artifacts that were not really reflective of how math actually works. And if you're going to do data science, you're going to do a lot of math. So with that, Viral Shaw, tell us a bit about Julia Computing and what you folks are doing these days to enable the analytical enterprise.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Like you pointed out, we are the creators of the Julia programming language, and it is the language of choice for scientists, engineers, quantitative specialists in finance, actuaries, pharmacometricians. Talk of any industry where people use math to compute, and you'll find that they're using Julia out there. So we find that Julia has been now downloaded over 25 million times, being an open source language. Anyone can go on to julialang.org and download it. And at Julia Computing, we built a product called Julia Hub, which allows scientists and engineers to get on the internet, using their browser. Just click onto juliahub.com and get Julia running on, right inside that browser. But the most amazing thing is that it literally gives you a supercomputer at your fingertips. So, imagine all those millions of servers that Amazon and Google and Microsoft have that are available for cloud computing. If you're a scientist or an engineer, you want to do a simulation. Let's say you're designing your next drug. Let's say for the pandemic that's ongoing, the COVID drug, or let's say that you're an engineer who's designing a new air conditioning system because it's getting hot. The climate's getting hot and people are upgrading their air conditioning systems. So if you're designing the next product in whatever scientific field you're in, Julia Hub lets you get on there, use Julia, press a button and run your computation on hundreds of thousands of processors, by just paying a few dollars without having to buy a whole data center. And that's what we at Julia Computing are essentially putting together.
Yeah, that's very cool too. So what's fun here is there are so many different ways to get things done, right? If you're going to do analysis, you can use traditional analytic capabilities, regression models, for example. Data science is really taking off. A lot of people assume that means using complex algorithms in Python and R, et cetera. I mean, I personally view data science as a much broader space. I refer to it as the assiduous management of information assets for organizational benefit, basically, because you do have to be very careful about what you're doing and keeping track of everything. But data science as an industry is really, the last few years, really taking off, right? How do you see things going, and what's the next big thing for you at Julia?
Yes, data science has exploded, and the kinds of things we can do. I like to call. I think machine learning, as everyone knows, has sort of made a huge impact. And I like to talk about what I call Silicon Valley style machine learning, which is Google using lots and lots of images and video and text to give you sort of these amazing algorithms for computer vision. So computer can now see, it can read text, it can write things. But what has happened is that those same enhancements from Silicon Valley have not made their way to sort of traditional science and engineering industries. Data science and machine learning have not had that much of an impact when it comes to designing the next drug or designing the next air conditioner, designing the next rocket. What chemistry should I use? What kind of battery should I use on my next electric vehicle, right? And the reason is because you need to combine the laws of physics as we know them, right? You have your Newton's laws, your laws of thermodynamics, and all this stuff with the kind of data that the Silicon Valley businesses are generating. And when you combine these things together, you get a field that we refer to as scientific machine learning. And that's one of the focuses of the Julia community, which is use data to enhance the scientific understanding and the scientific models that we've known for hundreds of years, and then simultaneously use the science to enhance the data that we are collecting and generating. And then when you put these things together, you get scientific machine learning, and Julia turns out to be one of the best languages to do that because it allows you to combine the solvers and the scientific code bases that engineers have written, along with all the data science capabilities that have come up in the last several years. And that's sort of where the Julia community and Julia computing are headed.
No, that's cool stuff. And I'll bring Ben Edmond back in from Connected to Fiber. People want things fast, right? And what's really cool about these technologies and the aggregate is you pull it all together, as you pull an Alteryx, a Tiger Graph, Connected to Fiber, Julia in the mix, as you kind of close that circuit, then you can dramatically improve how quickly you get things done. And that changes the mindset. I think that, customer adoption is going to be the lagging components to the storyline here until people figure it out, at which point I think it happens pretty quickly. But when you go, as we talked about earlier in the show, from taking 3 weeks to do something, taking 45 minutes to do something, that is a fundamental shift in the sort of biorhythms of the business, right, Edmund?
It is, and it's I think becomes critical part of who's winning and who's not winning in the competitive landscape. I don't care what industry you're operating in. Ultimately, getting to the heart of decisions, understanding it with deep insight, and being able to take action to improve a customer experience, to change pricing, to win the flow of orders that are coming in versus the competitive dynamics or making capital decisions. Ultimately, if you have to wait for that information, if you don't have the same, deep perspective, you're not in a position that is, part of the digital economy these days. And you need that speed and you need the breadth.
Yeah, and the information economy, as I call it, is growing by the day. And if you look at all the new business models that are spinning out, they're all leveraging, they're riding the wave, basically. They're riding some wave of the digital economy. And what I love about what you guys are doing is that you're enabling across the board, right? You don't discriminate on who gets to get their data faster, get greater connectivity, speed up the thoughts, speed up the business. Everyone benefits from that, right?
Absolutely. And it doesn't matter if you're small business, large business, in a big city, in a rural setting, in the United States or somewhere around the world. Ultimately, speed and data matter. And marrying those two things up to enable decisions and make business better is, what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And Viral, I'll throw it back over to you. As we all learn about how these different component parts work together, that's opening up new doors, and it's a great industry to go into if you want to have job security, right? Because this stuff is not going away ever, I don't think. What do you think, Viral?
Yeah, no, just look at the number of companies that have recently gone IPO and how many analytics companies that have become, gone IPO in the last few months. I mean, right? Think of like a company like Snowflake, for example, right? Just phenomenal IPO. And look at the number of jobs that are out there for analytics. I would say that, if you're going to learn a new language, you pick up Julia, for example, right? It's fast, it's easy, it's as easy as Python, as fast as C, and it's open source, which means, if you learn it today, it's gonna stay with you forever. You don't have to pay for a license to use it. And that's, it's gonna give you job security for a long time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. There's so many options, folks. We've been talking to Alteryx and Tiger Graph, Connected to Fiber, and Julia Computing. We are booking the second half of the year right now, folks, so send me an email, info@dmradio.biz if you want to be on the show. See you in a bit.